Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about Basics Part 3. The next portion we are going to talk about is Guangxi pegi. So Guangxi pegi means light cut. So that's mostly because if you've ever seen I don't know the word as kanji, but the kanji for light, it looks like the strokes for the 6 cuts that we do, right? So it's the forward or the center, the 2 sides, cross cuts, and then 2 downward, or largely upward strokes. But in general, when you look at the kanji for light, it looks like the same general pattern as when we do our Guangxi pegi. So Guangxi pegi also means like 6-time cut or like 6 cuts or something like that, depending on how you were taught. So for a 6 count, I'm going to do that center cut, left cut, right cut, just like what we did before. So this is the point that has changed here and there throughout the years. So when I first learned it, it was up, over for that single cross cut, and then your 2 diagonal cuts. Several years ago, it was taught like this. So center cut, left cut, right cut, going straight to the side for 1 Haidong pegi, up, and then 2 diagonal cuts. Now that said, the difference between those 2 is pretty arbitrary, right? But it is something that if you want all of your students doing the exact same thing, and if you want all the masters doing the exact same thing, if you want all Gumdosa doing the same thing, I guess we need to figure out which one it is. In the most recent session that I had, it was switched back to the up and over for that single Haidong pegi. So for now, I'm going to assume that it is going to be that one. So just be aware if you do see something going from here straight over, that might be going to be something that was lost in communication or something along those lines. So from here, again, so center cut, left cut, right cut. So also notice I'm engaging the hips a little bit as I do my center cuts. Bring it up, so again, notice that the core is activated. Sink it down, so again, it's almost like you're suppressing down here. Notice I do have a little bit of a gap here. I think I may have talked about this in a little bit. I have a little bit of a gap here when I'm doing anything beyond diagonal cut, because what you can actually do is use your pinky ring middle when you squeeze to actually fill in that gap. It gives yourself a little bit more oomph in your cut in here. So remember, this is Haidong pegi. This is aiming for where your belt is. It is not subdivisions pegi, aim for the chest, right? So you're up, over a single Haidong pegi. Notice I'm not doing this kind of thing, right? I'm here, if anything, I'm kicking my hips back in order to aim and counterbalance a forward motion. Bring it up. And also make sure when you're doing this diagonal cut, you're not doing this. So you should be able to see underneath your arm, here, cut down. Again, notice again, I'm not twisting. Up and over, cut down. Defense. And as you get more and more used to this, you want to do all this in one breath. So 1 breath in, and then out the entire time. And jump. After we have done this a few times, so this is no longer a student's first session, but like a couple weeks in or something like that, and the student is used to the idea of, again, 1 breath in and then continuous exhale for each of the cuts, as he or she gets used to, again, engaging the body. So again, the core, the deep shoulders, not top shoulder, but deep shoulder blades, the hips, the glutes, all that fun stuff. Then we start to add a little bit more for it, right? So I start talking about like how the beginning and the basics are intended for immediate combat, right? Because you're not going to be in kimase when you're fighting someone. With that said, this is a good warm-up, right? So again, kimase is not necessarily the best one, at least for me, to be starting off with if you're not stretched out and warmed up, just because it's very liable for cramping and stuff like that. But it is a good way for you to get used to using your upper body, warm it up, get used to engaging the core as you do your cuts and get a little more powerful. There are a few more drills I sometimes do that also work on this kimase cut. I believe there are a few of them already that I've made videos for, including that target drill, where you throw the target across the ring or to a partner. And also at this point I start doing continuous ki, just because it is actually a drill that I've seen with the Federation. And it's also something that just works on a different aspect of swordsmanship, and that's really the controlling of the breathing. So what that might look like is if we do, in fact, draw for our Guangxi pegi here, So what I did before was inhale once and constant exhalation. So and something you can do after that is take a deep breath in and then just constant ki or ki up as you go through. This is going to be a little bit different from the just because it's a different kind of ki up, right? So from here, I just kind of have almost like an operatic kind of thing, so just using your diaphragm. So you don't want anything strangled up in the throat. You want to use something that's deep down here. So from here, you can do something like that. And you can apply that drill to future things as well. So for example, when you go through a form, ideally you're only inhaling and exhaling when you're in a defense. So that means like even when you're doing form 1, so you draw, you're in defense, you don't take another breath in until you finish with your second crosscut. So what I like to do is, okay, we do this drill for, again, 6 count. We might do it for like 10 exchanges of like teidosei or something like that. But then eventually, I want them to be able to do constant ki as they do all of form 1, for instance. And then you can also continue that with other portions of form 2, right? So again, between defenses and so on and so forth. Just because, again, that's going to work on your ability to breathe, use your lungs, and all that fun stuff. As well as also kind of figure out the type of ki that you want, right? Because you don't want that strangled one, right? Because you're going to be very, very sore after doing only a few cuts. Versus learning kind of, again, how to use the deeper portion, right? So as opposed to like, ah! Which is really, really strangled. It's something that most people hear, but it's also just, it's better, just better, it's better technique. So as opposed to something that I've seen mostly in open hand, I don't see it that much in swordsmanship that much, but the kind of thing. So that concept is okay if you're, again, a teacher trying to make sure your students are, breathing as they do techniques. But having a kind of thing is all very, very strangled, and it's not going to be good for you in the long run. So it's going to be, you're going to have a lot of pressure in your head. It's going to not be great for your actual larynx and all that fun stuff. Versus if you learn kind of like open up a little bit more, first of all, it's going to be a lot easier for you. It's not going to strain anywhere in particular, except just your lung capacity. So I know that was a little bit of a long-winded rant, but breathing is actually a lot more important than you might originally anticipate. And also it's something that's introduced in basics, right? And it's also something you can do incrementally in basics. So again, I mentioned this last time, but like center cuts, 1 breath. Cha-u-pegi, so 2 cuts, 1 breath. Sanban-pegi, 3 cuts. Guangxi-pegi, 6 cuts. And you can do, again, like 10 cuts as you do switch cuts. And you can do, how many cuts is that? 12? 13? 13 cuts in form 1, just in that one section after the defense. And you can just keep racking those up so you really get used to being able to utilize a full set of lungs. Another thing you can do after Guangxi-pegi is what I call the 9 count. I don't know the actual Korean for this one. It's actually a portion of the cutting focus as well. But it's like a logical extension of the 6 cut, right? So you would do your center, left, right, 2 cross cuts, because it seems weird that you're only doing 1 in Guangxi. Then your 2 diagonal cuts, and then your 2 uppercuts. I learned this as 9 count. But it's, again, just something that's really useful because, again, I don't know why we just work on that 1 Guangxi-pegi, or that 1 Haidong-pegi for Guangxi. But if you want to add a little bit of something extra, this would be a good point to do so. Because this also works on something, again, a little bit different. So we worked with the Teisan-pegi, right? So again, from last time. So down, up, down, up. So notice the technique is subtly different. It's working on a different concept. So Teisan-pegi is working on that super clean transition down here, right? So I just blew through someone. I want to immediately twist and cut up, right? Also note that you don't want to do this kind of thing. Same thing here. Also being able to go from here to the other side pretty quickly, and then down, and again, smooth transition going back up. As opposed to what you're going to do in the 9 count, which is going to be down, down, up, up. So again, notice this is going to be working more on the hips, right? So you don't want the knees to move anywhere. Ideally, you want your toes where they are, your knees where they are, your hips can swivel, right? But you don't want to do anything too crazy. But the idea is minimalism, especially so non-twisting down here and incrementing slowly, letting yourself do a little bit more as you go up. So obviously your shoulders can do a lot if you want to, hips can move a little bit, but obviously knees and feet you don't want to move at all because that's going to ruin the torque, right? So torque, if you just twist everything, there's nothing to really generate that powerful torque, versus if you have a stable grounding and then the top portion or a different portion of it twists, there is that torquing motion that gives a little more power. So when you're doing this part, right, so we just did our 2 crosscuts, you're up here, so again, notice I'm engaging the lower core, so draw down, so again, rolling over the hip, draw down, again, engaging the hip, right? So you don't want to do like this, right? So you want to push it more forward, 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 defense. So one thing that I see quite a lot, especially for the uppercuts, is not quite the understanding of where you're hitting. So a lot of times when I see uppercuts, they either do this kind of thing, right? So you have that really late extension up here, or they're kind of cutting off to the side this way, or coming up this way. That's usually not what I see, but it's usually like this kind of thing, right? Almost like you're aiming for the knee or something. So make sure when you do go through really any uppercut, at least in the basics, you're aiming for right underneath the rib. So here, aim for the rib. Aim, blow through, aim especially this side, right? Blow through. And then pinch. So that more or less concludes the what we call stationary basics. So again, the basics when you're in kimase. So after this, we're going to go into our moving basics, or just stance basics if you want, like however you want to conceptualize it, right? So that's going to be moving in teirose. We're going to be moving in gungai dongyup paosengse, or just paosengse for some people. Chianse, sodose. Churchonse is technically not a stance. It's a general kind of thing. But all of those fun guys. So I'm going to use both the English and the Korean just because, depending on what I'm doing in the video, I might just say short stance when I mean sodose, just because sometimes it's a little bit easier to just like generalize using an English term. Even though within the community it's probably easier just to use a single Korean term, but it's also just trying to play around with people who may not be as familiar with terminology and stuff like that.